What is going on, everybody? Welcome to a different looking Axioms on Trial. I don't have my green screen. I had to move around some things in the room, and so this is what you get. You get me and Raiden and some shoes and some books and a messy room. And I had to tilt it this way because the behind me is extremely messy. So this is what you get. We're gonna go into part 2 of the video. I think we're roughly at the spot we were around 11 minutes or so.
Real quick, interesting comment right from the get-go. Mark writes, pretty sure Trent, I don't know how to pronounce the same, Doherty? I don't know, already got rid of the POE. So I'd be curious to see how he thinks that he does this.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, I guess, which, problem of evil you want to render. I don't typically take the omni properties one. I kind of exclude the omni properties. They're not important.
I haven't heard any arguments that to me has been convincing in getting rid of the problem of evil, but maybe I'll look the name up. It sounds familiar, but I don't remember what his position was.
Sure. Yeah, I think just the idea of infallibility, and then to actualize a world in accord with your desire or what it is you want to actualize isn't like God's not going to get tripped up on his way to actualizing that world. So it's not, I don't think you need the omni properties. It's just going to be like dependent upon what it is that you think God wanted to actualize in deliberating and creating the world. But we touched on that last time, so I don't want
to let's get right into
too much. So we'll just go straight into it. And yeah, audio good?
Yeah. Oh wait, I don't think. No, I can't. I'm not hearing anything now.
Not hearing anything?
No, it's not even on the screen. I thought you meant your audio.
Oh, I thought I clicked it. Sorry, I must have misclicked. I was looking at the YouTube page. Sorry about that.
They would hang men and women on hooks up by their tongues. Fathers were forced to rape their own daughters at gunpoint. People were buried alive, castrated, and roasted alive over fires. It was so bad that Nazi leaders, present in Nanking, intervened to put a stop to it. The Japanese army was so bad, Nazis couldn't even handle it. Was this inhumane? This was completely human. After the war, when Russia marched into Berlin, they did many of the same things to German civilians. Starving women who came out of their homes to search for food were targeted for gang rape by Russian soldiers. Fathers were forced to watch their daughters raped and tortured, and were forced to pick which soldier got to go first. In the USSR, people were tortured and enslaved in concentration camps in Siberia. Populations like the Ukrainians were selected to be starved to death. Parents were murdered in front of their children, but then the children were left alive to starve to death, as to not waste any bullets on them. Was this inhumane? This was completely human.
What does that mean?
Okay, but surely, these examples are extremes and the result of citizens being brainwashed by fascists and communists. It would be wonderful if that was all this was, but we see endless examples of these massacres throughout history. In Rwanda in 1994, people were tortured and raped, and over 800,000 were murdered. 1.2 million Armenians were murdered by the Young Turks from 1915 to 1923. Roughly 2 million were murdered in Cambodia between 1975 and 1979. In Guatemala, thousands.
The reason why we're not saying anything off the get-go is because, not to downplay anything that's being said. It's just that, we know, you encapsulate everything by, agreeing that there's evil, and pointing to them is they're examples. But, I mean, we agree, so.
Thousands of Mayan Indians were murdered.
Sorry, what were you saying?
Well, it's if anything, he's doing the job for us. How can an all-loving God allow for these things to happen? He's claiming that he's resolving the problem of evil, but he hasn't said anything of any value yet in terms of actually doing that. All he said was, we don't have the mind of God. This was in the earlier episode. Therefore, he has a moral reason to allow evil, we just don't know what that is.
Which just makes it something that ought to be done.
Yeah.
Like, that's the one thing I can never get around is like when this, like, you know, this thing that's presumably like not, right, this thing that's supposed to essentially be there for the greater good. I'm not really understanding like why.
How any of those things would be for the greater good.
Yeah, well, that is like a separate thing, but like why that would be like something that ought not be done in that case, because like in order for God's plan to come into fruition, or like Pontius Pilate, to have Jesus on trial, which comes to like, Jesus dying on the cross, or my sins being washed away or something by Jesus. Like, it's just going to be required that I have some sin, or that Pontius Pilate commits some evil, right, for the greater good. And it just seems to like, I've heard the phrase coextensive with the good, and I think that's a good way to put it, right? It just becomes like really synonymous. It just becomes analytically the same exact definition of what ought to be done, right, in order for that plan to be achieved.
The Reconciliation Commission of South Africa found that there were over 36,000 cases of abductions, rape, tortures, and killings. I could go on and on, talking about the genocide committed against the Rohingya Muslims, the rape epidemic in the Congo and Haiti, ISIS, the Taliban, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the French military in Algeria, the British Empire in Tasmania, and many other lands they conquered, and even the slavery of Africans in the Western world and the genocide committed against Native Americans. On every continent in every century, genocide, rape, and war has been committed by humans, because that is what humans do. And I've only stuck with recent examples. Our history is filled with countless more examples, and probably even more acts of genocide that were lost to time. Humans are murderous, selfish, evil creatures.
Awesome.
And we have the audacity to...
I mean, this is, yeah, clearly people have done these things, but it's not all humans are. Like, most humans...
Well, he's setting it up, right?
I know what he's doing, but this is so dishonest. Like, we are many things. We have the capacity for evil, but we also have the capacity to work together and help each other and have empathy. Like, if all of this was all we were, we wouldn't have survived as a species. We would all have killed each other already. So I'm not, obviously, yeah, this is part of what people have these instincts and these horrifically destructive drives, but that not everybody, and not for all time, and not in the way that he's setting it up. So
yeah, I mean, and so, not to beat a dead horse, but it's like, this is what X does. Well, it blows my mind that like an infallible being that would want a world with humans that don't have sin, right, that somehow he would be tripped up in actualizing that world. To just see that to me is always really strange, which is why I don't really care about the omni properties in the case. It's just, look, your nature is to not fail at anything logically possible, and then you seemingly fail once we point out that there's evil. Given no identified contradiction, I don't see why that would that would have to be permitted or allowed.
He's about to say we have the audacity to criticize God. That's what he's about to say, I bet.
Called genocide inhumane. I would bet the hundreds of species we've directly caused to go extinct wish we were actually inhumane. And let's not pretend that we ourselves are somehow better than these other humans, or that we would never commit such horrible acts. Most of the people who ended up committing these terrible acts were terrifyingly normal.
Pause it.
They did it out of hate, fear.
See, this is why I really have an issue with him. Number one, obviously, by inhuman, they are referring, this is just semantics.
Pride.
Oops, sorry.
what people mean by inhuman is just that it is a horrible act that goes beyond, like, that violates morality and violates empathy. Like, yeah, I mean, it's just a play on words. Like, yeah, we can say these things are also part of the human behavior potentially, but who the fuck is he to tell any of us that, oh, we're all capable of doing this, we will all do this? No, we're not. Certainly, it's much more likely that you're gonna think you're in the right of harming somebody if you think you have God on your side, than if you think that this is all there is. Number one. Number two, no. Who's he to say that these people were all normal? Like, it's just ridiculous.
So, well, I'll just set it to Kefi, but to Kefi seemingly fail. No, I mean that's a misuse of my own language. My own words. It is a failure given that that's what the theist commits to, right? Like, I mean, when the premises are committed, you don't have to accept, like, you could just say God does want evil, or like is allowing evil in that case, and then there's a separate conversation to be had, which would touch upon what I said earlier. So yeah, no, seemingly no, it would just be the case that it's an infallible God that fails at its actions.
Or just to be accepted by superiors. Holocaust survivor and Professor Freddie Katz says, only a tiny proportion of this century's massive killings are attributable to the actions of those people we call criminals, or crazy people, or socially alienated people, or even people we identify
Where's
as
the
evil
argument?
people.
Yeah, I mean,
The vast majority
so
of
what?
killings were carried out by plain folk in the population, ordinary people like you and me.
Wasn't?
Katz reminds us it was ordinary
Just waiting for the argument,
No, but
right?
but even that, like, they were committed by people that were driven to think by their own dogmatism that they were somehow superior to other people, that other people were like of a lesser species. Now, it wasn't necessarily religious dogmatism, but that's the power that belief has. They were driven by power. They were driven by fear of, if they didn't go along with what they were ordered to do, that they would be killed. Like, yeah, these horrible acts are part of human nature to a degree, for sure. But again, how does this absolve God when God is the one that created all the conditions that eventually allowed for this in the first place? So,
people that carried out the plans of Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. It was ordinary people that sat by and let it happen, assuring themselves their own skins would be saved if they just followed orders.
mhm.
It was ordinary people that let political divides turn into vitriolic hatred for their opponents that eventually led them to think they must be killed first before they turn and kill us. We forget that there were actually many Jews that administered the ghettos or manned the gas chambers out of fear for their own survival. Even now in this country, people who are on opposite sides of the political spectrum are spoken of as not even human or need to be murdered for the greater good. It doesn't take many more steps before we allow ourselves to slide into actions we cannot take back. People today are even talking as if a civil war is on the horizon.
Kefi, it's not about what I want. It's or what I think God wants. The the argument is an internal critique. It has to deal with if you accept that God's infallible and if you accept that God wants to actualize a world without sin or evil.
Yeah,
It's not up to me. So, like, I don't believe that God exists. In fact, the argument's precisely pointing out a contradiction, saying that God does not exist. So,
yeah.
but
So we're
just pointing
responding
out that
to
they'd be committed to a contradiction.
we're responding to the way in which God has been described to us as these are the qualities of God and what God wants. If you have a different definition of God that is different than that, then we can address the different perspective.
Yeah, the argument, at least the argument that like just predicates infallibility, is not gonna apply if you think God is fallible or if you think that God did want evil in the world.
Yeah, we're dealing with the kind of the classic definitions of how these things are defined.
Yeah.
And yet we don't think massacres could happen today. Given the history of our species,
Who said
I am
that?
highly skeptical.
Yeah, Zachariah, we haven't even heard the argument yet in 16 minutes into the video.
Things could not get out of control, as they so often have in the past. Psychologist Israel Charney says,
Oh my gosh.
sometimes sitting in a staff meeting of a modern psychiatric hospital, I could see how it all could happen. The ingredients were all there.
I'm gonna skip a
bitter,
little bit. Like,
hating,
I'm honestly,
barely
like, I don't care
everywhere.
about like some
Villains are
quote
dark.
from a guy or
Langdon Gilkey, totally
Yep,
in
more
error, or in an ancient
quotes.
do to survive.
Yep, we
You're
just
just
saved
Essential
listing
learning
bad
experiment.
things that have happened. Like, what
We
is
just
the
saved
in the other
ourselves
room.
4 minutes.
The
Let's see.
results
All right.
shockingly
Here we go.
demonstrated that 65% of subjects administered all the shocks as instructed, including one that was perpetrated to give a lethal shock. Other researchers replicated these results with even higher percentages, with subjects administering all the shocks. In 1970 in West Germany, 85% administered all shocks. In 2017 in Poland,
this isn't-
Goethe.
What's
Yes,
I'm trying to
but
understand.
not because they
like,
respect
what's
that
the
particular
argument?
law. It is out of self-interest. No one wants to get sidelined by oncoming traffic.
Jesus.
Most people do not rob banks because they don't want to go to jail. Most people do not cheat on their spouse because they don't want to destroy a marriage they may like, ruin their reputation, or lose relationships they
These are
derive
just
meaning from.
claims. Like, people.
It's hard to deny that much of what motivates us is self.
And sorry guys, but like I'm gonna skip forward like because it's like I'm interested in what the argument is, not like what rhetoric is about what people say, or like
But
things that have nothing to do with the actual like we're talking about God. We're not talking about like why evil happens in terms of like after the fact.
also,
Right.
two things here. One, this is what IP does in his videos. Like, he throws in 20-30 minutes of filler that don't actually contribute to the actual argument. He just wasting time. And two, he's making a false dichotomy. He's saying there's self-interest on one side, and then all these other things like honor, virtue, justice, fairness, equality, integrity on the other. No, the two are intertwined. Like, yes, there is a level of self-interest in wanting those things to take place in our society. There's also, for those things to really be what they are, I think they also require a real level of empathy for humanity and for the other. So it's not just self-interest. The two things are in harmony with each other. So he's just making a false dichotomy and then using the notion of self-interest as though that is an entirely negative concept. And that's just not true. So.
And to respond to KP, yeah, so regardless, you might have a different definition, but the argument, at least this version, is going to be dependent on just two premises that you accept. And so if you accept one of those, then it'll apply to you. But if not, it doesn't.
Self-interest. When people do decide to go ahead with these terrible acts, it is because they think they have clever ways out of them, or think the act will benefit them more than what they could lose. The sad reality is we are all motivated by our own self-interest. In light of human nature, even acts of heroism and sacrifice can be motivated by self-interest. Ernest Becker, who openly rejects Christianity, says, everything
Another
painful
quote
and
from,
sobering in what psychoanalytical genius and religious genius had discovered about man revolves around the terror of admitting what one is doing to earn his self-esteem. This is why human heroics is a blind drivenness that burns people up. In passionate people, a screaming for glory as uncritical and reflexive as the howling of a dog. In the more passive masses of mediocre men, it is disguised as they.
We're not going.
But he
listen to a
is
quote.
There is no one good. None are righteous. No one. No one understands.
All right.
No one seeks for God.
Here we go. Maybe something.
All have turned aside. Together, they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one.
Wait, pause it.
There are many.
All right.
Again, this is just another example of how toxic the religious mindset is. because we can look at the ways in which we are selfish, the ways in which we are violent, all these dark sides of humanity that have been problems historically. But it doesn't mean that we have to ignore the positive sides, the ways in which we work together, the ways in which people do have empathy and do have altruism. That is not entirely driven by selfishness. It is in parts, certainly, but not entirely the way he claims. And how is, all he's doing is saying, oh, well, look here. The Bible knew that we were, evil and turned away from God and all this stuff. And according to him, none of us have any worth as long as we're turned away from God. Meanwhile, a lot of people that were doing these violent acts thought they had God on their side, thought they were doing God's work. So it's just delusional.
Many that wish to whitewash Jesus and just reduce him to a good moral teacher that offers some good advice and lessons. But Jesus never paints humanity as something inherently good that just needs a little guidance, but instead as sinners that desperately need to repent lest we too perish. If Christianity is true and needs to answer for why bad things happen to people, the answer we offer is this: there are no good people for bad things to happen to. D.A. Carson says, first, Jesus does not assume that those who suffered under Pilate or those who were killed in the collapse of the tower did not deserve their fate. Indeed, the fact that he can tell those contemporaries that unless they repent, they too will perish shows that Jesus assumes that all death is in one way or another the result of sin, and therefore deserved.
Pause it.
Second, Jesus does insist.
And this is why your religion is garbage, because you're literally saying that children who or people who have empathy. I mean, there are people who don't live in this world just caring about themselves and wanting to hurt others. Like that is not the entirety of humanity. There are people who wish for the world to be at a better place. And according to your religion, this is speaking to inspiring philosophy, if he ever hears this, according to your religion, there is no moral difference between these people. We're all worthless without God. Somehow the evil that people do perform can be forgiven if just we repent. So Hitler repents, and what? He just it's all good because he repented, or like, I mean, I think that depends on how you interpret those words, right? And not everybody does in that way. But this idea that because of our sin, we're ultimately all worthless and deserving of the suffering that we experience. I mean, he's essentially saying any rape victim, any victim of abuse, any victim of any kind of suffering ultimately deserves it because we're all shit anyway. And they wonder why people like us laugh at the claim that religion is moral in any way. Yeah, like Barley saying, this is a way to dodge a question. Bad things don't happen to good people because there's no such thing as a good person. We're all evil, so we ultimately deserve evil.
You can convince somebody that they're worthless. You can do anything to them.
That death by such means is no evidence whatsoever that those who suffer in this way are any more wicked than those who escape such a fate. The assumption seems to be that all deserve to die. If some die under a barbarous governor and others in a tragic accident, it is not more than they deserve. But that does not mean that others deserve any less. Rather, the implication is that it is only God's mercy that has kept them alive. Third, Jesus treats wars and natural disasters not as agenda items in a discussion of the mysterious ways of God, but as incentives to repentance.
Great. So basically, we're
ahead.
just reacting to threats.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck? I mean, and this is why when people are like, "Oh, I'm not religious, but I like the character of Jesus, like as this moral teacher." No, he's a psychotic prophet, like, that is just garbage like the rest of them. There's nothing particularly impressive or beautiful to me about the stuff that Jesus says. because when I read the Bible, I expected to, if anything else, to at least appreciate Jesus as a figure in history. But this is the message I came out with as well, that he's just basically blaming everybody else for their suffering, like they deserve it.
It is as if he is saying that God uses disaster as a megaphone to call attention to our guilt and destination, to the imminence of his righteous judgment if he sees no repentance. This is an argument developed at great length in Amos 4. Disaster is a call to repentance. Jesus might have added, as he does elsewhere, that peace and tranquility, which we do not deserve, show us God's goodness and forbearance. It is a mark of our lostness that we invert these two. We think we deserve the times of blessing and prosperity, and think.
Well, I wanted to respond to Alec. Yeah, I mean, IP is obviously low hanging fruit, but me and Cease, when we like started this channel, we had like a goal to just go through a lot of his videos, because we have every day for like the rest of our lives to do content. So,
but also part of it,
we figured in between guests we're gonna get this done. So.
And also part of it is because it's anytime that I engage with a theist, say, well, maybe I might not know or have the skills to debate you, but
Michael from Inspiring Philosophy, yeah. I mean,
they point to people like him. They point to
precisely
capturing Christianity as though they're somehow like people that we should be impressed by.
Yeah, and that's one thing. It's like it's one thing to go and look at like the Rasmussens of the world, right? But like not even many theists know who they are. A lot do, and we want to gear a lot of the content more towards the philosophical side, obviously, but we do want to attack the Braxton Hunters and those guys as well, because there's more eyes on those people, and if they search and see a response here and somebody can make their assessment, right, then that's going to be a good thing. So I almost did say Rasputin. I think that's what was coming out. I don't know, something was coming out that wasn't Josh's name, so apologies to Josh, Dr. Josh.
The times of war and disaster are not only unfair, but come perilously close to calling into question God's goodness or his power, even perhaps his very existence. Jesus simply did not see it that way. Now, I've hammered this point for quite a while, because one of the worst lies we tell ourselves is we really are good and do not deserve the world we have created. But nothing could be further from the truth. God's judgment or absence in rescuing us from this world seems barbaric.
He just keeps showing like this
only to the person that has not understood the depths of human
like
psychology.
Presenting arguments.
But if we can take some time to reflect on the state of humanity, as C.S. Lewis puts it, God's wrath.
Why do I feel like, we're gonna be really disappointed and not receive an argument?
Seems to be inevitable, a mere corollary from God's goodness.
Again,
Miroslav Volf once questioned the wrath of God, but when he saw 200,000 people killed in Yugoslavia, he said, "My people were shelled day in and day out, some of them brutalized beyond imagination, 52. And I could not imagine God not being angry. Though I used to complain about the indecency of the idea of God's wrath, I came to think I would have to rebel against a God who wasn't wrathful at the sight of the world's evil. God isn't wrathful in spite of being love. God is
Yeah, so like the infallible deity that's really pissed off, that can't like the one that failed at the actualizing that world at which there is no evil is mad. Like to me it's weird. It's like I want a world where there's just vanilla, no chocolate. Like I don't know why an infallible being all of a sudden would be tripped up and be like, well, men are tainted with this like like disposition to choose the chocolate over the vanilla or something like that. And it's like then it always comes down to the free will thing of like, well, you need the chocolate and the vanilla in order to like have a decision or something. And it's like I've never understood like why the blame is put for the thing that creates the conditions at which it could just not have that, or if at the sight of evil it could just like end it, right? Like if it was like, I don't know why it would perpetuate it. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Two other things. One, I want to read this comment quick. Wrath implies that God is surprised by all this evil, which kind of nixes the whole omniscience thing. And also, I don't understand how they go from...
Yeah, it's like he knows the the proposition that it's going to happen like at T1, yet like somehow at T2, once you know, horrible action X happens, yeah, he's like all of a sudden like, whoa, my divine foreknowledge just out the fucking
also,
door, you know.
I don't understand how they go from how to make the claim that wrath is love, or wrath is because of love. This is exactly the kind of mindset that keeps people in abusive relationships, because they become convinced that their abuser actually loves them and is hurting them because they love them. Like, this is that exact mindset. Christianity is at its core about an abusive relationship, that we're ordered to both love and fear something that owns us and can do with us what they please. It's garbage.
I kind of like to use this. I mean, we might have done this on the show, but let's check. I just typed in. I'll usually just click one of the first links, so I might have used the same one. I don't know, but these are like just traits listed on some random website, and you can just look for yourself and see if this is indicative of that relationship. Persistent unreliability, constant judgment, nonstop narcissism, lack of communication, mutual maybe not mutual avoidance because someone is actually trying. Constant challenges, feelings of unworthiness, vibes of entrapment. Right? I mean, I think you're absolutely right, but permeates victimhood, right? Like diminishes your self-worth, lowers your high standards. Yeah, and you could go on forever, and it would apply.
Wrathful, because God is love. Now, I need to be clear that myself or any of the authors I've quoted are not saying every horrible thing that happens to a person should be seen as a direct punishment from God for their sin. No one is suggesting that. The point is simply to critique the notion that bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. And this is so because this is the world the human species chooses to live in every day. As R.C. Sproul once said, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, that only happened once, and he volunteered.
What?
The truth of the matter is, no one has died before the age of accountability that is not guilty. Every person is invested in self-interest and contributes to evil one way or another.
I mean, and that's another thing that is even more bullshit, is like age of accountability, as if everybody has like the same type of like development, and like that. Like it's strange to me. It's such an arbitrary notion.
Yeah, and again, he's conflating self-interest with evil behavior, when that the two are not synonymous.
I mean, what about people that like is it age of accountability? Is that really like the criterion, or would it be like a criterion of like ability to perceive mental content and like actually like adjudicate what it is that's being processed and understand the consequences and things like that, right? Wouldn't that be like something to be like, put over top of an age of accountability from some divine being, like something that actually takes into account the physiological structure that it itself designed, in mind?
Yeah.
Like it seemed like it would know that the age criterion isn't actually like applicable to like how actually we function, right?
Yeah.
And an omniscient being surely knows that proposition is true.
I mean, but he's saying, that God isn't directly punishing people, although he kind of says that he sort of is earlier in the video, but then he kind of backs up and says, well, he's not directly doing it. This is the world that we chose. Like,
yeah, We chose the world that was out of accord with the desire to not have evil. That makes no sense. I mean, like, that's the whole vanilla chocolate thing. Is like, if it's just the case that you desire a world where, like, there's no chocolate getting in your vanilla ice cream, like, if you're infallible, you're not gonna trip up instantiating that world and then blame that the people who have no control over that. It's like, if the idea is that, like, it's invoked or instantiated by humans, like, I mean, what predicates that even being possible, right? Because the idea that God couldn't prevent that scenario, like, you have World 1 where it's gonna come from Adam or something, and then World 2, right, where God's gonna try to just have the world actualized where there's no evil. Assuming that the Christian thinks World 1 has to happen for that plan, that's just to say, like, there's this thing God's not sovereign over, being like the fact that he couldn't control the outcome, where there isn't this option of choosing evil in the case of heaven or something like that. I mean, presumably there wouldn't be a contradiction in just actualizing that world from the get-go.
But also he's claiming that everybody has chosen this to be the world they're part of. Meanwhile, most people might not be perfect. People might, make mistakes, but most people are not murderous, genocidal individuals. Like, these are things that are usually driven by power and by corrupt governments. So, and again, this is not the choice of everybody. This is the choice of certain individuals. And again, all of this also relies on this baseless assumption that there's this free will. And none of it would be the case if God was what they claim that he is. So,
in light of all this, the real question we should be asking is not why does a good God allow so much evil, but why does a good God not just wipe us out for the good of the universe?
wow.
The answer to why there is so much evil is simple. There are so many humans. Every day, we choose to contribute to the evil in the world by simply going about our day, doing nothing, and focusing on ourselves.
And God allows this. God made it so.
And you solve it by just repenting to a deity.
God allows the circumstances to be this way. And his solution is that ultimately God would be in the right to wipe us all out. And these are the kinds of individuals who think that there's somehow an authority on how people should live their lives and how to be moral. Someone like inspiring philosophy actually thinks that the things he's saying are of a moral value. Meanwhile, he's asking us to accept abuse, to accept threats, that we're all deserving of death and suffering anyway. So God is not evil. God is great for just allowing us to live and not destroying all of us. This is delusion to the highest degree.
Put this into perspective with numbers. The UN estimates it would cost roughly $30 billion a year to end world hunger. And Americans alone wasted $116 billion in gambling in 2016. God has already given us everything we need to turn this world into Eden, and we simply delay it. Whether you want to admit it or not, every one of us contributes to the evil in the world, mostly through focusing on our or not. Americans alone wasted $116 billion in gambling in 2016. God has already given us everything we need to turn this world into Eden, and we simply delay it. Whether you want to admit it or not, every one of us contributes.
No, God has... You're muted.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, God has given us, according to his definitions, everything that we are is the result of God's creation. So even if you want to say, well, we have free will, which again, he can't remotely support, that free will is a condition that was constructed by God and allowed by God. So he's given us everything to be as evil as people choose to be, even in that context. He's still allowing for it. It doesn't, even if this free will was a thing, it wouldn't matter. He's allowing for it.
All right. And before I move on, the two people right here, you see my mouse?
Yes.
So these two people are having a discussion, and they're saying, if you want to support Axioms on Trial, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Axioms on Trial. And he's like, oh, it's a really good idea. And she's like, yeah, honey, it's real good. Those guys are real smart dudes. Anyway, back to the video.
To the evil in the world, mostly through focusing on ourselves and doing nothing to help. We have everything we need to end things like world hunger and human trafficking, and instead, we spend our money on pointless things just to make ourselves happy. Because if the problem is not right in our face, we pretend it doesn't exist. Simply put, evil exists because we exist.
Yeah,
when this has been pointed out, the next question.
Okay, evil exists because we exist. God, okay, premise one, evil exists because we exist. God made evil. God's responsible for evil. Or God made us, I'm sorry. Therefore, God's responsible for evil.
Yeah, and again, this is a complete evasion. Like, even if we were to buy into this free will nonsense, God would have the power to stop these things. So why doesn't he? I mean, he's not answering the question.
Yeah, it's really difficult for an infallible being to.
His answer is, well, we're lucky he doesn't kill us all anyway. Like, what the? How is that an answer to the problem? It's not a response to anything. He's dodging the issue, like he always does.
As if that imputes some like reasonable explanation, you know. But
the question is, why did God create us this way? Why are we so easily prone to commit horrible acts? Well, that is assuming God did make us evil. One can argue he did not. He made us free, and to be truly free means we have to be allowed to choose how we want to be. C.S. Lewis says,
yeah, so I mean, it's just going to be the case in that God, God wanted a world at which there's evil, right? And then knowing that it's going to create fallible beings that do evil, it's like, I mean, if you just go to your own premise that evil exists because we exist, surely it's not going to be an issue for the God to just,
but
have the world actualized. So if it's just the case that he does want to actualize the world with evil, then okay, right? Then that seems to be consistent. But then it's back to the whole. It doesn't seem that evil is going to be something that's really evil. It's going to be something that's like necessary for a greater good.
But also,
the moment you have a
but also, this is misleading because God could have created us free to choose, but not choose evil, free to choose between. And also, the other thing I was going to say is, again, what I said last time is, the victim isn't choosing to be killed or raped. So whose freedom is he valuing here? The freedom of the perpetrator over the victim. And why is it that we are limited in our freedom in every other context? Why is it that I can't fly if I want to, out of just pure will? Why am I enslaved by the laws of nature the way that they are? Why is he arbitrarily decide, no, the way in which he's going to let us be free isn't the one way that's going to cause us incredible amount of suffering?
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's this cap on like nomological possibilities, which are like laws of nature or like physical, you can't jump over like Mars or something.
Why couldn't we? Why?
Yeah, but it's like the same case. Yeah, it's like where you just have like, I use the example where, if I'm playing a gig and I have to solo like an A major, it's just gonna be the case that like the world that's actualized, I can't hit. I have 7 notes or so to choose from, but I'm not gonna be able to actualize like, a bad note. There's still freedom of choice, and I can deliberate on the action. It's just going to be the case that I won't actually hit the bad note.
Self at all. There is the possibility of putting yourself first, wanting to be the center, wanting to be God. In fact, that was the sin of Satan, and that was the sin he taught to the human race. It is not as if we were simply made to be this way. As a species, we choose to be this way every day instead of focusing on good and holy things.
I can pause it again.
This is not how things were supposed to be. Early on,
Again, this goes against his own definitions of what he says God is. He says God is all powerful and all knowing. And then he talks like this wasn't what was intended. Well, if God is all powerful and all knowing, he could have made it different, because there's nothing about, like, again, what we said about freedom that implies there has to be freedom to be evil. And also that there couldn't have been any accident or any surprise to a God that is all knowing. Certainly no one that's perfect, who couldn't make a mistake by the definition.
Sure.
He wants to mess around with the definition of love to be something that's actually abusive and not actual love. It just...
God called humans out of the wilderness to serve as priests over creation and to enter into a covenant with him so that he could sanctify us to subdue the rest of creation in his name. This is the story of Eden, when Adam and Eve were called by God to be close to him and learn his ways. But they rejected the covenant God made with them and left his presence so we could be our own gods. And with that came the freedom to go as far into evil as we wanted to, no matter how it would affect those around us. God did not doom us to a world of evil. Our species, by rejecting Eden, did so. And without God's protection in Eden
The
and the
snake
tree
was
of life,
required.
we now live in a world of moral and natural evil. Now, many will object they were not in Eden. How can we be forced to live in a fallen world that we did not choose? Clay Jones responds to this by saying,
No, like, to me, I don't care about any of that. It's like, it's just like, is that the necessary world, right? I mean, if it's just the case that God has to create that world and evil is required, right, then it is the case that nobody can. There's no, like, it's the, like, if somebody's serving tennis, right, like, I can only hit back. I have to wait for them to make the move, right? I have no say. I'm waiting for the serve, right? It seems like really odd to me to say that you would take responsibility and blame where the desire to actualize some world is out of accord with what God set out for. Like, that's just a failure from the infallible God's perspective. That's where I get hung up on the whole thing. I don't really understand, like I'm in a fallen world and I wasn't responsible. Like, that was an action of someone. That's irrelevant to me. Like, that doesn't matter to me.
It doesn't matter to me. I don't think it's irrelevant, but I don't think that he resolves these issues. Real quick, Alec, I'm just curious if you have any videos in the future that you want us to review. Leave it in the comments. I think that, because I agree with you, this is pretty low hanging fruit. But
it is, yeah. It's hard to feel like there's much substance to say because it's like there's not an argument.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what else it says.
That we didn't individually vote to make Adam the head of our race doesn't matter because God knows who can best represent us.
What?
Also, if God knew that all of us would have acted similarly.
It's weird. I wish, like, maybe this is why it's frustrating is you have like the IP kind of crowd just quoting people. There's nothing like, there's no argument. You're not going to get a syllogism. That's what I was hoping for.
No, but the fact that the best person that God knew could represent us is one that would have turned away from him and led to all of this. Then what he's saying is that the world of suffering is the necessary one. Like, he's a moron. I was just asking because I feel like you would provide some interesting videos for us to review that would be more substantial than this nonsense here.
Yeah, actually, this is a good time to say that. Is that a lot of the videos we have to will either be recommended or we'll find, or some Christian might send it to us or something like that. And so, if you want us to review content, just email us and send a video or leave it in a comment.
Yeah,
or leave it in a live chat. We don't require like a super chat or you to be a patron or anything like that. That's just if you care to support. But yeah, we will take any and all video requests. So just drop them down.
He does no wrong in choosing one person to represent us. If Christianity is true and the problem of evil needs to be addressed, one cannot say.
CJ makes a great. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Clearly, God did do wrong if the person He chose to represent us turned away from Him. Like,
it caused me to wonder if IP is a necessitarian. If he's not, he's committed to the fact that there are other possible worlds. So I don't know why he's talking like this is one. He might be committed to like the view of like this is the best of all possible worlds or something like that. But then you're in. To me, that's like you got him at that point because it's like, then it's the case that like the amount of people that like died in the Holocaust couldn't have been like one less. It was like the right amount, right?
Yeah.
It's like just such an absurd view to have. Like, if it's the best possible world for some guy to like blow himself up saving a family from like a grenade, right? Like couldn't have been a better possible world where that event just like didn't happen. This is such a strange view.
It is unfair. Adam and Eve were our chosen representatives. God, in his omniscience, knew who the best representatives would have been, and therefore, given human free will, there were no possible futures where humans did not choose sin.
So He's allowing it.
So why even give us free will?
Wait, yeah, hold on.
Should we really give free will? We're our chosen representatives. God, in his omniscience, knew who the best representatives would have been, and therefore, given human free will, there were no possible futures where humans did not choose sin.
So there wasn't a possible world that God actualized where it was just humans choosing the good. However, God actualizes that world not only in heaven, but he himself is a free being that chooses only good. Yet it's the case that it's not. Like, what's the contradiction?
How
would be the contradiction in a future where humans didn't choose sin? I'm not. Sorry,
if God is free and God is perfect, I don't see why it couldn't be the case that he could make us free without us choosing evil. So again, his definitions are entirely contradictory.
Yeah, and I don't know that he's saying like it's weird because it's like all possible futures, and he's saying out of all the possible futures, there were none that actualized where they didn't choose sin. But that seems weird that like to say an infallible being or something like couldn't have a world actual, like there would be some like logical bar preventing a world where humans would choose just
that's just a claim. Well, why would that have to be the case, especially when that world is attainable in heaven? So
yeah, and like CJ makes a good point. It's like, what does it even mean to say I can do B instead of A if there isn't a possible world where B obtains?
Right.
I mean, because like it's weird. He's trying to do the thing where he's like, there are these possible worlds, but out of all of them, there is none where that obtains. And then so to me, that's just okay. Well, what would be the contradiction in God actualizing the world where humans just choose the good? right? Where
and why
don't choose sin, right? Because then presumably there is a bar.
Again, why is that kind of freedom one that makes his creation better than one where that's not the case? Why control our freedom in every other context? And why is the freedom of people who want to do harm respected as opposed to the freedom of people who don't want to be harmed? Like, how is that the best world? The best world is one where people are allowed to do evil and impose their will on others. It doesn't make any sense.
So why even give us free will? Should we really have been given the freedom to be truly evil? Why on earth would such a world not be better, where we are deprived of free will, so as to not cause grief, pain, and misery?
That's not the alternative. The alternative is having free will to deliberate, but we just choose good. So you're just missing.
Clay Jones notes it is not hard to perceive of such worlds, and more often than not, they are far worse than a world with free will.
How is it worse?
We ought to consider
This is why we consider that we keep free will intact.
How humanity has looked at this scenario, and unsurprisingly, a life without free will is often portrayed in movies as a horrible existence. And this should be pretty obvious.
What?
Take the old movie from the 50s, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The invaders do not want to kill off humanity, but simply change humanity.
The movie that everybody has seen in 2022.
But again,
To lack free
how
will,
is this
and they
Huh?
I don't understand why he's saying that a world without free will is inherently a worse world. Like, I don't know what he hasn't said anything. Let's see if he does say something.
offer it as a wonderful existence, free of pain, desire, emotion, ambition, self-interest. And such a world not only terrifies us, it becomes obvious that such a world would be worse than a world with free will and evil.
Miles,
okay,
it would have been so much easier if you'd gone to sleep.
Don't you say it's obvious? Provide an actual fucking argument. Like,
yeah, it's obvious. Why is it obvious? It's obvious. All right, moving on.
Sleep last night. Now relax. We're here to help you. You know better than that.
Where you want us to put them?
Would you like to watch them grow?
No, thanks.
Put them in there. There's nothing to be afraid of. We're not going to hurt you.
But once you understand, you'll be grateful. Remember how Teddy and I fought against it? Well, we were wrong.
You mean Teddy doesn't mind?
Of course not. She feels exactly the way I do.
Let us go!
Look, we'll leave town. We won't come back. We can't let you go. You're dangerous to us.
Don't fight it, Miles. It's no use. Sooner or later, you'll have to go to sleep.
I'll wait for you in the hall.
Miles, you and I are scientific men. You can understand the wonder of what's happened. Now just think. Less than a month ago, Santa Mara was like any other town. People with nothing but problems. Then out of the...
We're just watching a scene from this. Okay. I want to get to this part because I got to cut it soon. My landlord is going to cut the power for a second to fix an outlet up here. But do you want to pause it here? Or do you want to see if this finishes?
Well, let's see what the point of this scene is. Oh, wait, when is he cutting out?
I got about 5 minutes.
Okay.
There came a solution. Seeds drifting through space for years took root in a farmer's field. From the seeds came pods, which have the power to reproduce themselves in the exact likeness of any form of life.
Yeah, Alec, I agree. I mean, I have friends and people that think that like God's divine foreknowledge and omniscience is like compatible with free will, but I don't really see the argument. It's just going to be the case that the proposition's known before I actually do the proposition. So it's the case that I couldn't choose otherwise. But
how long is your power going to be cut out for? Do you know?
I don't know, presumably like I don't know, probably longer than 30 minutes or so, I would assume.
All right, do you want to end it here? Or maybe we'll see. Well, you're almost done. Yeah, do you want to end it here and then we can maybe finish it up next time around, or maybe do something else?
Yeah, let's do that. We're back tomorrow, so we'll be back with Cease's brother tomorrow.
Okay.
Assume later at night, right? Probably like 8 or 9.
I would say 7 or 7:30.
7. Okay, somewhere around there. So we'll try to schedule it ahead of time once we know the time and get all that. Yeah, Cease, if you want to close out the show or if you want to mention anything, I think I am good. Apologize for the tiredness today, everybody. I'm a little sleepy, but try to come back tomorrow with full energy.
CJ, my brother's going to come on to talk about, I think, how the notion of gravity should be reinterpreted in modern physics, like in how certain, I think, recent discoveries are kind of shifting the way that these notions are understood in physics. But I'm gonna double check if there's anything else you want to discuss. Or
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross.
We appreciate that.
Thank you. But yeah, outside of that, I don't have a lot to say. I think, like we were saying earlier, if you guys have any ideas on videos you want us to review, just email us or leave them in the comments, and we'll definitely.
And we're still trying to do Mondays at 2.
Yeah.
If we the kind of update is if we don't do Mondays at 2, it's going to be like today at the time we did. So
yeah,
that's going to be kind of the general pivot. So expect a pretty standard schedule of Mondays, Fridays, and then if Monday doesn't happen, we do Tuesday, and then the Wednesdays are kind of our sprinkled in days that we can get a third show in for the week. So goal is 2 a week, 3, if not 4, if our time's open. So we appreciate your time with us because you could spend it anywhere else, and you chose to spend it with us. So we really appreciate that. Until next time, we love you. Peace out.